Welcome to SKC Office Hours, the podcast where business owners get practical insights, forward-thinking strategies, and real conversations to help you grow and succeed. I'm Sarah Krom, and at SKC, we believe that running a business isn't just a career, it's a lifestyle. That's why each episode brings you expert perspectives on topics that matter most, from tax strategy and financial clarity to leadership, growth, and everything in between. Whether you're scaling your business, navigating challenges, or planning for what's next, you're in the right place. Let's meet today's guest. Andrew Donofrio happens to be my partner in life, and as of today, my husband of 3 years. Welcome to Office Hours.
Thank you.
You are here today to chat about what many would think as life's most precious commodity, and that's time. But first, can you share with the audience 3 things that they should know about you?
Well, they won't know one now, right? I'm married to my beautiful wife, Sarah, of 3 years. What goes with that on the personal side is I have wonderful children. I've raised several children that are adults now, so it's a very, very fun phase of life. I think the second thing would be that I'm in the third iteration of a career. My first career was a 25-year law enforcement career, which uniquely prepared me for what I do now. Then I owned a tech company for a while and transitioned out of that. And I've been in the coaching space, both personally and professionally, for quite some time. And I guess a combination of the two. The last thing I would say is I've been a fitness enthusiast for nearly all my life. And it defines a big part of not just who I am as a person, but my mindset and what I bring into many of my goals and commitments.
Excellent. I'm very happy that I knew all 3 of those things that you shared with our audience. No
Could you
surprises.
imagine if you didn't? Could you
No
imagine if you didn't?
surprises for the host. So this sort of little snippet of what we're about to talk about related to time actually came out of a larger keynote that you have experience giving, just so the audience kind of gets an idea of where this came from and your sort of research that you've done into this area. So if we could just jump off, what is some of the head trash that people have about time? And more specifically, when we talk about high achievers, what is this idea of time management that kind of gets thrown around, in my opinion, a useless way?
Yeah, I think there are a few things. The first thing I would say is that there's no one system, no one hack. Everybody's sort of looking for that one system or hack that will define how you use your time in a way that's most productive. And I think as we'll get into, it's beyond that. It transcends that you're going to find the one system. If that were the case, then there would be one book, right? There would be one book on time management, one system on time management that would be globally applied and would work for everybody. But the reality is it's not the case. Why are there so many? There are so many because people are different. But there's things we need to do before we even try to use a system that's going to work right for us. So I think that's the very first thing. When you talk about high achievers, I think the other thing that's important to note is that when you start to endeavor upon this path of time management, we get caught up in the notion that every waking minute has to be productive, and it doesn't. But there is a balance, right? I mean, we throw around terms like self-care and taking time out for ourselves now, all important things, but we want the balance. We want to make sure that we're um, balancing between the two, productivity, achievement, and making sure we're recharging the battery, taking care of the machine. But not every waking moment has to be a productive one. Conversely, you probably need less than you think when we talk about downtime and self-care, but some of that's my head trash. So I'll try not to throw too much of that in there. But I do think that striking a balance is probably one of the most critical things that we can do when we talk about time management.
So no one size fits all solution here.
Absolutely not. As unique as psychology is to human beings, time management applies.
I happen to have a unique insight as I live with you, so I'd like to unpack at some point before we close out this podcast when you actually have downtime, but maybe we'll work that in at the end somewhere.
Okay, you got it.
But you kind of covered yourself because you said everybody's a little bit different. So
That's right.
I'll put you at a certain end of the spectrum. I've heard you in different conversations that we've had, and in listening to prepare for your keynote, contrast the concepts of time and money. Can you share a little bit about that comparison and contrasting with the audience?
Yeah, I think there's a few comparisons that are worth noting. First, both of them share one commonality is this. It's if you don't tell them where to go, you're going to wonder where they went. So not being intentional with your time or your money, you're going to really wonder where it went. But I think where the separation is where we actually have them confused with each other. People, in my experience with the clients I've worked with, my own mindset in the past, very different than now, is that money is a finite resource. There's only so much of it that we can earn, so much of it to go around. We have to be really careful with it. And we do. We have to exercise caution and care with money, but it is not a finite resource. It's an infinite resource. We could always make more. We could always up our level of success. We could always lower cost and save more. There's a lot of possibility when it comes to money. I've met Uber drivers who had incredibly successful careers, but drive Ubers in retirement because they want spending money or for whatever reason they do it. Always opportunity to earn more. Time, on the other hand, not so much. But oddly enough, I find that a lot of people treat time as if it is an infinite resource and are not mindful that it is very finite, when in fact it is. It's 24 hours in a day, and we all get it. Sometimes days seem faster than others, sometimes hours and minutes seem faster than others, and there's actually something to that. There's a psychological concept of time that is impacted by how we feel and what's going on in our life. So that's why sometimes things do feel faster, but the reality is 24 hours. And you can't argue with that. And so, you know, really being conscious of time and how we spend it, I think is critically important so that we don't invert the two, money and time.
And I think, we get a little muddy when we talk about time and money in comparison like that because we can count money, right? We can see it accumulate. We can see it, as you said, save, whether because we earn more or because, the market did well or because our expenses decrease. We can't count time like that because we don't know when it's going to stop for us. And I think that, people don't necessarily like to talk about that aspect of it, but there's a psychological aspect to the fact that you're counting down essentially when you look at time now. And I don't mean that in a morbid sense. I mean that more in an inspirational sense of let's make the most of what we know that we do have, which is right now, this moment or this day. Versus when you look at money in a savings account or a brokerage account and you're looking for that to start accumulating and growing. And so I think that, looking at it that way, where we're debiting time, where we're decreasing our time right now. Now, see, I can't help but use accounting terms. Versus growing the money and putting more deposits into that account, I'd argue that we need to make quality deposits into the time that we have because we don't ever know when that clock is going to stop.
Yeah, nobody gets out alive, right? Nobody gets out of this game alive. So for sure. But I think that's, to your point, what makes it so incredibly important to be mindful of it and how we utilize it. And there is a notion, though, the one thing that I would say, there is a notion about making an investment in time to give you more quality time later. And I think that's an important thing to have front and center, whether that's intellectual endeavors, emotional endeavors, or physical endeavors. But making commitments up front is important for quality later, the same as we talk about with savings. The key, and this is a critical key, is trying to enjoy the journey, is to try to make sure that as we go through it, that the journey isn't laborious and that we're not full of dread in the journey for the one day when we get to do this or when we're able to do this, similar to I will be happy when I have this house, right? We all know that that's fleeting and fading very quickly. So we want to try to endeavor upon processes that are fulfilling along the way. And we can do that when we're in the right groove and, filling ourselves emotionally, intellectually, and physically.
It's a great transition to our wake up call. And again, your opinion has been that we as individuals are the biggest thieves of our time, our own time, and that we steal it through our own bad habits, through our lack of, that term self-care that you used before, that lack of vision and having a fixed mindset. So let's take a deeper look into some of these areas. And if you could, because you sort of transitioned with this one, talk a little bit about how our health and health in general relates to time.
Sure. I mean, I hear a lot of times, in my coaching practice, and my clients will say, I would love to work out. I would love to take better care of myself. I would love to exercise. I would love to meal prep, but I don't have time. And my response to that, somewhat flippantly, but there's truth to it, is if you don't have time to invest in your health, then you most certainly don't have time to be sick. Being sick physically will eat into your time like nothing else. The doctor's visits and Google research that you'll no doubt go down. Coincidentally enough, in a group meeting this morning, the center focus was an interview I had with a cancer survivor around mindset and just the commitment of time that he had to invest for his care back was enormous, and talking about how to squeeze in work and maintain his business over that time. But without question, making an investment in your health will save you a tremendous amount of time, even though you feel like on a day-to-day basis, I don't have an hour to work out or a half hour to work out. I won't even ask for an hour. I don't have a couple hours on the weekend to meal prep, or at least try to plan for good decisions with meals for the week out. Where am I going to eat? What am I going to eat? When we do that and we make that poor investment in our health, the time will catch up with you later. And in the times, particularly when you're supposed to be enjoying it, right? When you've worked to a certain point and maybe you are at a point where you can work the way you want or not work at all if you didn't want to, but now you're fighting your health. So, and I think also even on a day-to-day basis, if you're not making that commitment into health, then what's the reality of that? Low energy, the time day to day is not working out. So yeah, I'm a big advocate for physical care and as it relates to the use of our time.
And I've heard you say before, and I will butcher this because that's how I tend to be with words of importance like this, but I've heard you say before in the context of, getting sick or being diagnosed with something that, and you'll correct me because I will get it wrong, everything matters and then nothing matters. Or you know what I'm talking about, that anecdote that you
Yeah,
say?
yeah,
What
yeah.
is the right way to say it?
Well, no, I mean, I think what you're alluding to is that everything all of a sudden comes to a stop when you're sick. And now the main thing of your life is no longer the main thing. The main thing is you trying to get back to being healthy. Your whole table and your goals reset. And so what the expression, it kind of alludes to this, is, the person who's healthy has 1,000 goals, 1,000 problems, 1,000 dreams. The person who's sick has one goal, one problem, one dream, and that's to regain their health. And so, in that context, think about it, right? And the reset that that can create. And so, that investment in our health physically, and we could touch on if you want intellectually and emotionally, and how that impacts our time, but physically certainly is probably one of the most obvious.
And I think it goes back to what you started with, which is talking about having a balance. And if you can incorporate those better health habits into your daily lifestyle, that becomes a balance of combating disease or illness or deterioration as a day to day, as opposed to all of a sudden something hits you and now you have to deal only with that element. But yes, let's unpack some things about emotions.
Sure. So, I mean, all the time strategies in the world are for nothing if you're showing up anxious, showing up depressed, showing up angry, showing up worried. If your emotions hijack you, then your productivity drops significantly. So making that investment in your emotional well-being is very important. And what does that look like? Well, that looks like, you know, taking care of yourself on a regular basis, doing things that enrich you, positive things, therapy if it's needed, coaching if it's needed, self-development, journaling, those kind of activities, meditating, those kind of activities that set you up. Are we going to be perfect at it? Absolutely not. you talked about quantifying before when it came to money. Physically, it's easy to quantify. Emotionally, it's not so much. You could even say, like, I got in 3 workouts this week. Yeah, they weren't all perfect. They might have been perfect for that day. But emotionally, it's a little bit more difficult, and we're going to slip. I mean, I always go back to the story of you and I in the car going to my father's wake and me being sick. And, I sort of am an advocate for like, keep your mind right, keep your mind right. But in that moment when we were stuck in traffic, and I turned to you and I looked and I grind my teeth and said, I can't be sick right now. And you called me up short. You just kind of leaned back and went, oh, really? Like, what are you going to do about it? Are you going to get upset and angry about it and make it that much worse? Or are you going to try to just adjust? And it was a catch for me. It was a moment where I went, well, she's right. There's nothing I can do about this. And so this anger that I'm layering on top of it has to go. And so I think when we get strategic about managing our emotional well-being and being proactive and less reactive, in that our time is better spent and we're absolutely a lot more productive. If you show up somewhere angry, your mind is literally focused in that one area on anger. And so you're laser focused on it. And so to try to do something else is very, very difficult.
Well, and I think, you're very self-aware, you're very good at self-reflection. Um, you've spent a lot of you've invested a lot of time and energy in improving yourself and being able to improve others through your coaching practice. So, you are pretty high functioning when it comes to managing your emotions, right? And understanding when they get off the rails, if you will. Not everybody is, right? And when we talk about high achievers, specifically business owners, we tend to not have a good support system or avenue or resources when it comes to our emotions. Do you have any tips or guidance for individuals who may be in that boat where they understand the importance of it? They just don't know what next steps to take because, therapy may not be the answer for everybody. And, not everybody understands what to do when you open a book and sit down to journal.
The first thing that I would say is, and you know this about me, I haven't always been like this, right? The 40-year-old version of me towards the end of my law enforcement career was sort of full of righteous indignation. I had it figured out. I know what's right. I know what's wrong. Get on board, or you're not my kind of people. And of course, then I realized the sort of arrogance of that and that how that didn't work for me. The very first thing is the awareness. There's an issue here. And that's what it was for me. I'm spending a decent amount of time in judgment. I'm spending a decent amount of time, sort of in this place of anger, or at least frustration, as it related to where I was at or where other people were at. And so that awareness equals choice. Once we're aware of a problem, once we're aware of something that isn't serving us, we now have a choice on how we're going to manage it and deal with it. And so that recognition for me was, okay, this has got to change. What do I do now? And part of that was a lot of what I call intentional self-reflection. And that's an exercise that I give to people all the time, intentional introspection, which is what's not serving me. I'm a huge fan of unwinding or rewinding the clock in a non-judgmental way. You show up somewhere, you're frustrated, you're angry, you're anxious, whatever it might be, and you lost time as a result of that. Is not judging that and not getting frustrated by that, not criticizing yourself for that, but rewind the clock. What brought me there? Why did I get there? Is there a mindset shift I need to endeavor upon? Are there exercises I need to do? Or is there a reframe, which is huge, right? Everything we experience happens between our ears. That's our world. That's our reality. And so sometimes it's a way of thinking about things that really change our emotional well-being. And so the very first thing is to recognize what it is that's sending us down those paths and then being intentional about strategizing for the reframing piece. It's a lot to unpack in a short amount of time, but I would say without question, the very first thing is awareness equals choice. Recognize those times when it's unwinding, or when it's causing you a problem, and then rewind the clock and find out why. And then, there's strategies for overcoming for sure.
I think a big part of it too, just to kind of close on the emotions topic, is shutting out the noise, right? We're a very stimulated society, whether it's where we socially put ourselves or what we're looking at on our screens or what we're listening to, because there's just so much content out there. And I think that some of that noise muffles, as you said, what's between our ears and throws us off track. And I think quieting that noise is a big part of being able to do a lot of this self improvement and self reflection.
Yeah, it's weeding the garden of your mind, right? Making sure that what enters in the garden of your mind isn't toxic. Yeah, that 4-inch stress box that we carry in our pocket, that comparison box, right, can be very, very challenging at times and can draw us in. And so, yeah, you're 100% right. We got to watch what we feed our brain.
So we are both very structured, regimented people, which I mean works really well because we are on the same schedule and live in the same house. But I believe that the more that we can structure our day around habits, good, healthy habits, the less energy and resources we need to waste on deciding what the next thing is, right? We don't have to wake up every morning and decide, are we going to work out, because that's just worked into our routine. We don't have to wake up every morning and decide, am I going to make the bed today, because that's part of the process of our morning routine consistently in a series of activities that it just falls into no matter what. But our mind can be an enemy here too, specifically when we talk about dopamine stealing our time. What are your thoughts around that?
Yeah, I think you're on to two big things here, but I do want to point out that we both make the bed together. So I just want, because you said I make the bed, I just want to make sure that everybody knows that
Oh,
we.
well, I was speaking to the singular audiences. Yes,
Oh,
that
okay.
is true. We do make the bed together. Thank
Okay,
you for
good.
that
I wanted
clarification.
to be clear. I don't want to get nasty email.
We will
Um,
now have 3 more successful years of marriage to add on to this 3.
so yeah, we structure our day in a way I think that sets us up for some success. There are habits that are ingrained that then provide a day that we're both striving for. What are those habits, right? It's well, coffee, of course, but it's journaling, it's reading, and our reading is usually something sort of self-development, and it's exercising and then breakfast together. There is no decision, to your point. It's a quality of life and something that we've instituted that we don't think about. We just do every single day. When we travel, we do it. Wherever we are, we do it. And I think the reason for that that's so important is because motivation is a visitor. It's a nice to have. It's nice when it shows up, but it's not every day. So like I said, I'm a fitness enthusiast. Do I want to work out every day? No. Do I ever wrestle with the idea? Absolutely not. Why? Because it's so important to me that self-discipline kicks in and that habit has been set. So when those things are critical, we want to make sure that we structure our day to set us up right and develop those habits, as you put it, around that. And the same holds true while we're on this topic of time management is how you structure your day as a whole, right? We've heard of time blocking, we've heard of theme blocking, we've heard of the one thing, eat the frog, all of these strategies. But knowing who you are, knowing how you work, knowing your rhythm is really key to managing your time right. So if for me, for instance, if I have to write a blog post or I have to work on a presentation, it is not happening after 2 o'clock. And it's not that I'm tired. I can coach all day. I feel great all day. There's just something about the way my mind works from morning until noon, 1 o'clock, that I can write, I can be creative. After that, nope, I can be engaged in coaching, but I'm not writing. Knowing those things is critical about ourselves and setting ourselves up with those habits, with those time slots to the extent that we can, I think is really, really helpful from a productivity standpoint.
Agreed. Let's talk about the role that other people play in our lives and how, whether we let them or not, they can have an impact on our time. My personal coping mechanism with that is I set up a lot of boundaries as a protection mechanism there. But I happen to be a very strong personality and I happen to be in a role that I can set up boundaries in my professional life and not have negative consequences necessarily. But what are you seeing people allow others to do in their worlds, in their lives that impact their time?
I think it's important to get clear on a couple of things as it relates to other people. The first thing is this: people can be one of the biggest time sucks ever, but that's if you allow it. Now, there's a certain amount of people that are obviously necessary in your life. But to your point, then you put up guardrails, right? You put up the boundaries around it. I've had people talk about like, I have this one friend that she really wants me to check in all the time. And I find myself going down a rabbit hole. And the strategy we came up with in that particular instance was 10 minutes before you're about to get home from your job is when you make that call. And you make the call and you're on that phone for 10 minutes and you say, okay, I just pulled in the driveway. I got to get home and get in and start dinner. Now you have your guardrail up and you're good. So strategies like that can help, right? The other thing that I think is important to be clear about is the fact that you are a result of the five people you spend the most amount of time with. I know it sounds cliche and we've heard it, but your inner circle is important. If they're planting weeds in your mind, if they're negative, then it's going to drip. It's very hard to put that up. So you want to surround yourself with people that make you better. You want to be better for others. We talked about this morning in that cancer survivor conversation about the importance of his inner circle and the strength he drew from those closest to him and how much that impacted his mindset and his recovery overall. And I think that applies not just to catastrophic events or very challenging events, but to events on a whole, right? Everyday events. So that's another aspect of it. The other thing that I would say to the professionals listening and the business owners in the group, if you allow people to jump on your calendar, they're going to steal it. And so the idea of I'll do it for them because it'll take me less time, or I can't delegate it because nobody does it as well as I do it. All those things that come into it are time sucks, and that's allowing other people to suck your time. There's points in time where perfection can't be the enemy of good enough, and you can't deny somebody else the other aspect of growth by doing it themselves. And so just be careful of the fact that you gravitate towards what's easy as opposed to what you should be doing. And so, allowing other people to suck your time is without question a challenge for most of us and something we have to be vigilant for.
So two things from that. The first is talking about calendars, and I know you weren't talking about appointment scheduling, but it made me think of calendars in that context because, Caitlin and Andrea, my partners at SKC, both utilize their administrative assistant to schedule things for them on their calendar. I do not. I used to think it was because I was a control freak, and maybe it still is, but it's more as we're having this conversation about the fact that I don't want something popping up on my calendar that I know isn't going to be when I want to do it. Now, in some cases with clients, that's unavoidable. And, I've taken meetings after hours and on weekends, and of course, tax season, all bets are off. But, I don't let somebody else schedule my meetings, my appointments, my days, because they're too important to me to leave that to somebody else to do. And that's just my solution. That's one of my boundaries. And I think, like you said, everybody's got to find what works for them. Talking about the five people, you being a product of the five people that you spend most of your time with. I totally agree with that. And I call it your board of directors, even though it's not an official board of directors or even a formal board of directors. But I think the important thing to think about there is almost like positive peer pressure. Because, if you're with a group of people that, may want to engage in unhealthy activities, whatever that is, whether it's physical, mental, emotional, or maybe they're just negative Nancy's and they, are just always down on something or don't have a positive attitude, that will bleed into you and that will affect you. Set up your world so that you can have that positive peer pressure to be more upbeat, to be more grateful, to be more healthy overall. And I think that is a good takeaway from, the five people you spend your time with. So you and I have always disagreed on this fact. And you say that compartmentalizing and multitasking is not a thing, and that as humans, we're not good at it. However, I think I'm exceptional at both. So, and we've talked about this before, not on a recorded podcast, but I'm sure there's other high achievers listening or business owners listening who, may not be as bold as me to say that I'm great at both of these. Maybe they feel they're only good at one of the two. But I know that you very strongly disagree with this. Can you share why with our audience?
You have to attack life as a whole person paradigm. To say that you could be struggling with your health, but your profession and your work life would be dialed in, I think is a mischaracterization. You can't compartmentalize your health and separate it out. To say that you're struggling emotionally with something, but everything else in your world is good. To say that your finances are bad and that you don't, you're having trouble making your bills, but you won't let it affect your relationships. Or that you're having problem with a child and somebody struggling with addiction or a problem in your marriage. But you know what? I go to work and I shut it off. I think that's impossible. I think, can you do it for finite periods, 20-minute meetings? Sure. But there's a price to pay for that too. So the reason that I'm an ardent advocate for this idea that, and I'll say it very clearly and plainly, we suck at compartmentalizing is the fact that things bleed over and you're going to be impacted in other areas of your life. And I think it's critically important to work on the whole person, your whole life, the aspects of your life because we have a very difficult time putting them in a box. Admittedly, you are an anomaly in a lot of ways, but I still would go back to the idea that you do compartmentalize for finite periods of time, but you don't compartmentalize as much as you think. But we won't get in an argument here.
No, we wouldn't get in an argument either way. We've talked about this before. It didn't
We
end in
have.
an argument.
No, I know. I'm teasing.
And I actually do tend to agree with you on the compartmentalizing, globally speaking, that you can do it for a finite period of time, but you are going to pay the price of that, meaning, you're going to quote, hold it together for whatever presentation you have to do or whatever meeting you need to preside over. And then you're going to be more drained and have less energy after that than had you not had made the attempt to compartmentalize. But I do still think that I'm a B plus, A minus at multitasking.
I'm not going to argue with you.
So just to wrap up in the last couple minutes that we have together, and I can always spend more and more time talking with you on our content, no matter what subject matter we choose to discuss, because you do have such a well of knowledge in all of this. But what are some of the characteristics that you see in the highly productive people that you work with?
Intentional. They're very intentional with their time. And I think what makes people intentional is prioritization of what's important. We talk a lot about work-life balance, and when, there's a prioritization about what's important in your life, then you're very intentional. I think highly successful people are good at that. They know to keep the main thing, right? And the main thing professionally and the main thing personally, and not let things interfere with that. They know not to get distracted by shiny objects, right? And have their attention pulled. I think that's a really critical component. So, when you are intentional and focused, then your time follows. And I think that part of that comes from really understanding where am I at? What am I trying to achieve? What am I trying to achieve as a professional, a business owner, a C-suite, whatever your job is. What am I trying to achieve as a father, a mother, a partner, a spouse, whatever that looks like. As a friend, who am I in other people's lives? When you're clear on who you want to be. We often talk about what I want. I try to reframe the question about to who do you want to be? When you understand who you want to be, then what you want comes a little bit easier.
Great. Excellent. So our standard sign off and goodbye activity for our guests is I ask them to leave us with one thing that they wish they knew when they were 25 that they've since learned. So do you have a nugget that you wish the 25-year-old version of you knew?
Yeah. God, one, huh? All right. I'll limit it to one. I'll give you two. The first is you don't have to suffer for success. You can enjoy the journey. A lot of people are under the conception that in order to be successful, there's a lot of suffering that has to occur, and there's not. Some of that suffering is self-imposed. I was very successful in my law enforcement career, that very first career, but it was a lot of worry and a lot of suffering that went with it when it was unnecessary and didn't have to happen. And so I make sure that I try to take that lesson now into my life and my practice now. And that part of that comes with an abundance mentality. The other thing is that I wish I knew at 25 that there's not a problem you can worry your way out of. So worry is a useless sort of endeavor. We think that by worrying, we will avoid the problem, but it doesn't matter. And 80% of what we worry about never comes to fruition. And even the 20% that does is never as bad as we imagine it. So those are the two things. It's this idea of suffering and the idea of worry that I think are unnecessary.
Both of your nuggets are around mindset.
Yeah, well, you know me. That's the business I'm in.
I know. I do know that. I do know that. Thank you for sharing your wisdom today, darling. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely my pleasure and happy anniversary again.
Happy anniversary, love. To our audience, thank you for spending time with us on SKC Office Hours. Remember, at SKC, we don't just help you run your business, we help you grow it. Have a productive day.